Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session. Normally, Local Government Association Conference lasts for 2 days, and last week we should have been in Harrogate, where last time we went it was blazingly hot. But actually this year we've got the opportunity of about 2 weeks of LGA conference, and this is one session that I'm absolutely delighted to be hosting, this webinar called Spotlight on the Councillor during the pandemic. My name's Judy Billing and I'm the Deputy Chair of the LGA's Improvement and Innovation Board. I'm also naturally a local councillor, and I have the great joy of being on 2 different councils, one in North Hertfordshire, a district council, and Hertfordshire County Council as well. And I have the double joy of the fact that on one of the councils, Hertfordshire County Council, I'm a very minor opposition character, whereas in North Hertfordshire at the moment, I'm part of a Labour and Liberal Democrat-led administration. And so I've seen this pandemic from a number of different sides. We've all had the most bizarre 3.5 months, but no less councils, council officers, and councillors themselves. Before we start the session, it's always, of course, housekeeping time. And this is where normally I would be telling you where the toilets are, but I'm assuming that most of you are in your own houses, so you probably know better than I do where they are. The other thing I meant to say is if you'd like to ask a question, and I see that somebody has already, could you use the Q&A function? And I'm just delighted to be here, and I'm delighted particularly to have 4 absolutely marvellous speakers with me this afternoon. We've got Caroline Clapper. I'm not going to call people councillor all the time because they all are. We've got Caroline Clapper, who's Deputy Leader and Leisure, Culture and Health Portfolio Holder at Hertsmere Borough Council. And weirdly, like me, she's also a county councillor, but she's on the administration side, the winning side at Hertfordshire County Council. We've got Councillor Oliver Ryan, the Executive Member, Finance and Economic Growth from Tameside Metropolitan Borough Council. We've got Councillor William Hongo, Deputy Leader of the Majority Opposition Group in the London Borough of Southwark. And we've got Sarah Rouse, who's the Leader of Malvern Hills District Council. And I think we've got a pretty fantastic spread of political interest, types of council, and everything else. Now, the LGA conference paper this year is called Rethinking Local, and we have at the moment a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, not just to recover whatever that will look like and whatever that will mean, but actually, and the term new normal is a bit dull and hackneyed, but there's no doubt, I think, that in every conversation I have with councillors, we're all agreed that it's never going to be quite the same. And there are some really positive things that we never thought were even there for the learning that we've learned and that we'll hopefully be taking forward into our work. So during this session, you'll hear from our 4 councillors about the work they've been doing during the pandemic. And then we'll have plenty of opportunity, I hope, for questions, certainly, and hopefully some answers as well. There won't be answers that tell you what to do. There'll be answers that are about people's experience. And that's what the LGA does at its best, is share experience between everybody. And so I think it's time that you heard from other people other than me. And so first of all, I'm going to hand over to Caroline Clapper to tell us what it's been like in Hertsmere, where I know that there have been a lot of issues about numbers of deaths, and perhaps she'll tell us how they've been dealing with that. Over to you, Caroline.
Thank you very much, Judy. Thank you for inviting me to say a few words about how COVID has impacted my life as a councillor. When I sat down to consider the areas that I might reveal in front of this most illustrious group, it turned out to be quite an enlightening experience, because ever since that day in March when COVID began to impact, and all the way up until now, things have needed to move so quickly. First, to adapt to ensure effective ongoing council functions, and then to ensure all stakeholders are considered and supported wherever possible, which of course is still very much an ongoing requirement. So it makes a moment of pause and reflection to effectively look back on the experiences over the last 4 months seem a little bit premature. We clearly still have a long way to go before we are anywhere near post-COVID. So there still is and will be much work for us all in the coming weeks, months, and likely years. One word frequently used when referring to COVID-19 is unprecedented. And that's certainly true in all of our lifetimes. But this virus came so suddenly and so aggressively that none of us could really have conceived how the world as we knew it could and would change so drastically and possibly permanently. I heard a lyric from a post-COVID song on the radio last week, which actually does a pretty good job of summing up the surprise that has shaken the world. It simply said, "Whoever said people can't change the world have never ate an uncooked bat." Appalling English, but an interesting point, I thought. Being a twin hatter for Borough and County as I am gives a councillor an enhanced perspective in times of crisis, faced with both the requirements of supporting constituents directly, as well as supporting the infrastructure on which we all rely. The initial thing that struck me more than anything was how admirably and rapidly my local community mobilised itself to try and support the local COVID aid effort. Housewives started cooking in their kitchens to provide NHS meals for the local hospital, and in no time at all were delivering over 4,000 meals a day. Countless residents who were no doubt frightened by the prospect of contracting the disease were signing up and volunteering to do shopping, dog walking, generally aid with social isolation issues, helping those in our community who needed help the most. This incredible level of community spirit massively warmed my heart, but it also served as a powerful reminder to us all of just how much we rely on these amazing selfless volunteers throughout our community. And if those volunteers stop working tomorrow, for whatever the reason, I do shudder to think of how our towns would have and would cope. Moving on to consider the response of the local authority, I have to say that I'm enormously proud of that too. They've exceeded all of my expectations. As just one example, we had staff members from parking services that agreed to go and knock on the doors of those who were and are shielding to check on their well-being. We've seen so many authority staff selflessly taking on totally different roles without hesitation, throwing themselves at the task, whatever it might be, with total gusto, and working long hours in far more challenging situations than they are used to, going well beyond anyone's expectations. For some time, Hertsmere sat at the top of the UK leaderboard, but for all the wrong reasons. On this occasion, seeing more COVID deaths than anywhere else. There are several clearly identifiable reasons for this. Firstly, we have a proportionately high elderly population with a large number of care homes in our borough. We also have a very large BAME community, and being located just on the outskirts of London as a commuter borough, we are very close to the eye of the pandemic storm. With the coming of the easing of lockdown restrictions to try and reignite our economies before the damage becomes too permanent, we have had to try and put in place workable social distancing measures in our high streets. Between the Department of Transport and Hertfordshire County Council, it was initially decided that all the parking in Radlett High Street would be removed entirely, so as to widen pavements and assist with social distancing when the shops reopened. This was presented to shopkeepers and residents as a fait accompli. When those measures were implemented in advance of the shops reopening, there was total uproar from our residents and from the shopkeepers themselves, who simply could not function or survive without at least being able to offer collections or deliveries outside their shops. Now, whilst we do have a large car park behind our village high street, many of our residents are not able to, or do not like the idea of, walking for a very short distance. So given this scenario, I had to try and carefully negotiate a compromise that would hopefully satisfy everyone. I managed to persuade highways to switch what were diagonal spaces into horizontal spaces, so as to effectively gain back disabled spaces and 50% of our parking capacity, so that short-term parking, deliveries and collections could be effectively maintained. I'm very grateful for the flexibility shown by highways, as these changes did manage to pacify the baying crowd, who at one stage were actually threatening to riot over this matter. Indeed, I hear about all of the various schemes going on, both those organised by residents and those by the local authority. And I think that my role is to pass this information to and from parties to ensure that all voices and opinions are considered. I've always maintained a very active presence on the local community Facebook page, which has around 6,000 members, almost half of residents. This site has become a very effective tool for information sharing and gathering, and in fact, spreads far wider than just to its members and onto the hardest to reach groups through word of mouth thereafter. Due to careful management of my Facebook activity, when I now post an update, members tend to read and share it, much more so than from any other members of the group. I always ensure I never post anything remotely political so as to retain an unbiased and trusted presence. Most of my posts end up with over 100 likes and numerous comments where residents discuss the content with each other or to seek public opinion, which actually serves to provide some really useful, and other times not so useful, feedback and suggestions. I always attempt to maintain my role as a trusted source of relevant information, promoting only relevant developments and worthy community initiatives. At the start of the pandemic, when there was a great deal of panic and uncertainty, one of the most important things that I felt I needed to do as a community leader was to remain calm and positive and to try and lead by example. As you can probably tell, I take my responsibilities as a local representative and leader very seriously, but I'm also a constituent, and I've also had to make the same adjustments as everyone else, attempting to juggle those responsibilities with those of my home. Thankfully, I'm very blessed to have a supportive husband and 3 young children who are all pretty well behaved for at least 30% of the time, which has meant I've been able to navigate these times relatively efficiently. It's quite difficult to divide my experiences and responsibilities with those I discharge as a portfolio holder for the borough and those as a local councillor, as the lines are so often crossed and blurred. But during this time of COVID, if at this stage I had to sum up the most important things I feel I've personally provided to and for my community, I would like to hope it would be strength of leadership, a sense of calmness, and always relevant information provision. I hope you found these insights useful and to be of some interest, and thank you very much again for inviting me to speak. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you so much, Caroline. You might be interested to know, even if nobody else in the room wants to know, that your experience with your high street was very much mirrored in the beautiful ancient market town of Hitchin in North Hertfordshire, a few miles up the road from you, in terms of a scheme that wasn't going to work, but once everyone sat down together, it was possible to make it happen. I think one of the most important things that Caroline's drawn attention to is the fact that as a sector, we're sometimes regarded from outside as a bit bureaucratic and a bit slow and not the fastest sort of organisations. Well, I think we've probably laid that one to rest. Not so much the councillors in a way, because we've done extensions of what our jobs were anyway, but we've had droves of officers who've been asked, as Caroline said, to do something totally different from anything that they've done before, and who've embraced those opportunities with lightning speed. So thanks for drawing attention to that, Caroline. And I'm now going to turn to Oliver Ryan from a very different place in Tameside, Metropolitan Borough Council, who's going to tell us about his experience of the last 3.5 months.
Thank you, Judy. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Is this working okay? Thank you. So yeah, I'm Councillor Oliver Ryan from Tameside Metropolitan Borough Council. That's Tameside without an H, and we're one of the Greater Manchester 10 boroughs. So in addition to my role as a cabinet member and a ward councillor, I also have a deputy portfolio role at Greater Manchester, and I'll try and go into a little bit more of that through this quite brief introduction. So under usual circumstances, I like to kind of break up my role into being a ward councillor, your role in terms of the organisation, your role in terms of your group, and then your role in terms of your party. And those of you that have been on council training sessions with me will know that I try and fix to those 4 areas as into the kind of interlocking, interwoven worlds that we have to exist in as councillors. And I think COVID has shown us really that we've had to put more emphasis on ward councillor work and a bigger emphasis on demands within the organisation, less so in terms of party and group world. So I'll try and concentrate a little bit more on those. But I also want to stress some of the personal circumstances that I think we're probably going through as councillors, and some of the lessons and difficulties that I think we've probably tried to go through. So I'll kind of start from there. So in terms of the organisation, I think every panellist will probably say this today. It's been a really challenging period. It's been busy, it's been intense, and it's been a constantly moving feast that I think has demanded a reactionary setup from us. What that's practically meant has meant weekly COVID boards, weekly cabinet catch-ups, more and more intense work at Greater Manchester to do with growth and to do with clean air to ensure those agendas continue. And then a huge concentration in terms of my portfolio brief on the financial picture of local government and what we face as a sector. So I've probably spoken to more businesses than I have done previously, just to hear more of their experiences during COVID. We've processed almost £50 million worth of grant applications to do with businesses and business holders, and that's been a huge task for our staff as well. All of the work that we really do in terms of the council has been intensified, and as the last speaker said, I think I want to put on record, and every councillor should, our thanks to all of our staff, without which we couldn't do this. But what it's actually meant in terms of trying to set up some of those more urgent work streams is that we've set up a humanitarian hub in Tameside, which has tried to get food and services and funds out to the most vulnerable people in our communities, and that's really depended on all hands on deck from our staff and for the goodwill of an awful lot of volunteers across Tameside. And I think that's been some of the magic that's perhaps come out of it. The financial picture for us over the next few years has been an awful lot of work around that. We're facing a gap of around £92 million over the next 3 years, so it's huge. We also exist in an integrated healthcare system, so we do anyway, but we have GPs and healthcare professionals on our decision-making bodies, and I think having more public health and medical expertise in terms of our decisions has really helped us through this time. It's been a great benefit to Tameside. So keeping services moving has been one of the more urgent issues that we've had to deal with. Make sure that there is still a bin service, make sure that we can still process some of these more urgent demand-led services like children and adults has been particularly difficult, but we've managed it through this. And I think overall, as an organisation, we've not only had to think immediately, but we've had to think strategically as well about what we plan longer term for some of our services. So I think we've reacted, but we've also planned as an organisation, and I'm quite proud of that in terms of that sphere that we've existed in as a council. So I think things to take away: it's been busy, it's been urgent, but it's also meant that we can think a bit longer about how we deal with some of these more structural issues that COVID has come about with. As a ward councillor, I think inevitably more people are at home, and so you end up with more casework. There's more people giving us calls about bins and other issues in the local area, as well as some more difficult cases to do with access to funds or getting food to people in the right circumstances. And an example of that, which I just thought of a second ago, was a gentleman that lives in the estate just opposite where I live, who because of his universal credit application hadn't managed to have any access to any funds for a significant period of time, and had the prospect of being left really without anything for a week and a half. And through coordination between myself, the council, and the MP's office, all done remotely, we managed to find some crisis service support that helped him through that period. So it's asked a bit more of all of us, I think. In addition to that, I'm sort of the point of contact for the business community in Tameside, and so I've had contact from businesses and leaseholders and local community groups who are all really battling for survival during this period and want someone to talk to and to have a sympathetic ear for their issues. And so I've had an awful lot of calls about that. I've heard a lot more experiences, and it's been quite a harrowing time, not only for casework but for organisations and businesses that are sort of going to the wall in the same period. So it's been difficult. I represent Audenshaw, which is one of the biggest wards in Tameside, and I think I've seen the diversity of my ward in that casework as well. The third kind of sphere that I think we inhibit as councillors is the personal one, and we've had to work at home during this period. And I want to be really candid about this, and I realise time is pushed, but it's been a lot more difficult to be a councillor during this time. It's been a lot more difficult to do the work that we do. I think that's been the same across the whole economy in the whole UK, but I don't think we're immune from that. I think sometimes people think we're a sort of faceless blob of an organisation that just continues regardless of what happens in the outside world, and we're not. It's been difficult. It's been a much lonelier place to be, to do this job, and I think most people attending will probably think the same thing. We've had our tech issues like every other council. We had a great debate around whether Skype or Zoom was the best thing to use, and that debate still rumbles on to this day. I think in terms of lessons I've taken away personally is that we've got to discipline ourselves and our diaries, because every moment that you give, the council takes, because there are such huge issues that we're dealing with, the big questions of our society. And I think if in a COVID environment, when you sat on the computer, some days 8 till 8, it can be quite difficult to take a break away from that. So I've tried to paint and do more jigsaws in between that period as well to try and take my mind away from it. But I'd recommend people don't burn out and try and take a bit more of an effort to say, we know there's lots going on, but make sure you look after yourself and your own well-being as well. I came away with 4 lessons, I think, from COVID, which is that I think there's been a crash course in finance, local government finance, for everybody at the council, including the organisation and councillors, which has helped not only to establish the price and the cost of some of these services, but the value of them to our communities also. I think the main thing we've learned is that councils can, and this is an LGA session, so hashtag councils can, we can answer the call of duty, but we rely on all hands on deck and the goodwill of staff, as I've said, and companies and more. And actually, I think through this crisis, we've been the best part of government. And I think what we've learned is that throughout the end of this, we can't rely on government to do things for us. We have to do it ourselves. And that in many ways, we're the stable block of our communities in an otherwise quite chaotic world. And some of that major planning around unemployment and growth and services in our boroughs, we have to do the planning for, because nobody else is going to do that for us. Organisationally, we've become more flexible as well. I think we should continue with that post-COVID. So all of those lessons can be taken forward for me. And I think in the next phase of COVID, the questions will be how we tackle those big questions in a world of decreasing resources. We're not heading for calmer seas, we know this, but I'm confident that in the way that we've reacted as the best part of government, that we're on a steady ship, and I trust the crew and the staff to have done a great job during this period. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Oliver. And a couple of things you've reminded me of, talking about medical expertise, a greater focus on public health, working with the National Health Service. Just a personal note, I've been one of the great shielded through all this, and I wouldn't have believed it was even possible to not leave your house for 3 months and be a local councillor, but it is. And also, because we are very much the public interface between public services and the people we represent, I've been able to say to people in the National Health Service things I have not been able to say before. Like, if you send everybody like me a letter asking us to sign forms immediately saying that we don't want to be resuscitated if we get ill, it's not a good look. It doesn't actually make people feel optimistic about the future. And I think there's been a lot of partnership working that we've not seen before. I've certainly seen it with health services and indeed with the police. So that where I am, the Police and Crime Commissioner has instituted a weekly meeting with all the local council representatives who have an interest in things like antisocial behaviour and community engagement. And that's been massively valuable. And some of these things we must really, really be careful not to lose. Enough of me for another second. Let me then hand over to William Hongo from the London Borough of Southwark to tell us what it's been like for him, and perhaps he'll tell us a little bit about what it's been like in opposition as well, because that would be handy.
Thank you so much, Judy, for inviting me to speak to this event. I'm William Councillor Hongo from London Bridge and West Bermondsey in Southwark. London Bridge, West Bermondsey is one of the major wards with a very diverse population, as the whole borough is. We have almost over 50% of the population with diverse origin. And first of all, I wanted to say COVID-19 pandemic has been impacting on all of us in a very different way. and particularly on the impact on the family was very dramatic. And I want to send my condolences and my thoughts for all the families who have suffered during this period in UK and across the world. At the council, my focus is about community safety and youth services. And I'm also the opposition deputy leader. And unfortunately, just a few days before the pandemic, I had a foot operation, a foot reconstructions. So I was lucky this thing happened before because it was planned since last year. But I was not able to be very mobile, and I have to keep my foot off the floor for 6 weeks because I had a cast. So it was a very big challenge for me because as a councillor, I like to have direct engagement with my constituents. And also it was a period where social distances were into place. So I couldn't do the way I wanted to do. So we have the initiative to create some mutual aid groups in our ward. Is a group with volunteers to help all the vulnerable families and elderly people in the ward to provide them the need. So I was involved in terms of coordinating between the mutual aid group and the council, and by calling those vulnerable people and asking to find out what their needs were. And it was very important to use the phone and be calling them every day and to ask them if there's any support they need or if they're living with someone from the family. So this one was one of my occupations during that time. I was also involved in some LGA meeting organized to discuss on the best practice to tackle the issues of COVID-19. So it was a meeting formed by council leaders, opposition leaders, were regularly coming together to exchange the best practice across the country. It could be best practice to tackle issues around housing, healthcare, education, antisocial behavior, domestic violence, and so on and so on. So in terms of domestic violence, because we had quite a lot of cases in our borough, I was very concerned because some partners may be very controlling and confiscate the phone of the victim. So the idea was probably to create a neutral place where the victim can go, like a neutral place like a pharmacy, for instance, or a supermarket, because even the police has given some instructions to call 555 and remain silent. This cannot work when the victim is deprived from a phone. So I was trying to, we were trying to find a solution around those gray areas in order to prevent the victim to keep suffering from their partners. Another area I was very involved in was in housing. In terms of housing, in Southwark, we have a high rate of overcrowding families. And paradoxally, we have about 6,000 empty homes. So I have approached the council and asked if there's a way to reinstate those empty homes during the COVID-19 for those families overcrowding who definitely will struggle to maintain social distancing. So the council have made effort to reinstate few of them, but some of them, they didn't have resources or enough material to achieve this. And we were trying to keep pushing them because overcrowding and is a very difficult issue in this borough. We are, I think, the most populated borough in the whole London, and it's a very big challenge. We're over, I think, 300,000 residents in the whole borough. So it is, in terms of housing, apart from the private sector, even the private sector, some families cannot afford the prices of the rent. So it's very important for us to try to liberate those empty homes. Also, there was another issue I was very involved, and it's about the elderly living alone without a family to support them. It was a very challenging period for them because they didn't have access to technology like Zoom, or some of them didn't have any laptop or any way to communicate. First of all, they were isolated and they have no one to talk to. So we have to make sure with our volunteers who are willing to brave the social distancing to help them. And my role was to coordinate and try to communicate with them, and in order to maintain them safe. Another issue we had around the schools and the children at home, there were an issue of safeguarding. We have to make sure that those children in the families are well fed. And my role was to contact the school, the head teachers, and ask if the teachers can regularly call the families and check on the children, how they're doing in terms of the homeworks, how they're doing in terms of the activities, because it was important to make sure that our children are safe in terms of safeguarding and activities, and also homeworks to keep them active and ready to go back to school whenever possible. Another area I was very keen to be involved is with the young people. It's part of my portfolio at the council. In Southwark, we have a very high rate of youth violence, and we have a sort of civil war between our young people, because the estate are kind of classified into territorial gang area because of the drugs. There's a high rate issue of drug in Southwark, and I really appreciate the effort of the police. For many years, we have put so many people away and moved some families away, but it's not enough. The drug business is a very lucrative business, and it has killed so many of our young people from vulnerable families who are used as a foot soldiers in our streets. And in the period of the COVID-19, the drug dealers were more visible, and thanks to the residents working with us, we have been able to identify them and try to send them away. But in terms of the young people, we have created a program, particularly an organization called Active Community Networks. They work with young people, try to coach them, try to remove them from the street, to give them motivation. So during the COVID-19, we asked them, instead of being on the street, to try to integrate to our program of mutual aid groups and to help our residents. And I think this program was quite successful because they really subscribe to it, and we have a very reduced rate of murder of young people during that time. So in terms of the lesson to gain during the COVID-19, I think some families didn't receive from the council the tailored need. For instance, I'll give you a quick example. The council sending them potatoes, leeks, and so on and so on. Some families, they don't know how to cook. They depend on the fast food. And sometimes it was a problem for them because they will leave the food, the fruit and vegetable aside, and they won't really use it. And it would have been a waste. So in terms of the lesson in this exceptional moment for the future is to deliver tailored need for our residents. And also we have a statistic from the Age UK and also from the linkage. Many elderly people were feeling being patronized, and they were just told what to do, and they didn't really express themselves. And this is due to the fact that we need to make an effort in the future in terms of digital integration. We need to put more resources to train our elderly people to be able to use those devices during those periods of crisis, which I find very important in terms of communication. In my group, what we have done in terms of best practice, we have made over 40 recommendations to the council, the administration. As opposition, we would have liked to be more involved in the decision-making process during the crisis. But the only way we have to intervene and show our commitment to our residents who elected us is to forward those recommendations to the leader of the council and to the CEO of the council to express what should be done in terms of education, housing, healthcare, youth services, and so on and so on. And we were very glad that the council took into consideration our recommendation. So I think the COVID-19 period has been a very challenging for all of us. And we have learned a lot of lessons in terms of how to support our constituents. And I think I have learned to be a stronger leader in a very difficult period of time. And in the future, I'm prepared. Whatever comes again on our way, I'm prepared to be the leader to respond to the need of my constituents. This exceptional period we have been through has been very sad. Like my mother has always been telling me when I was a child in France, c'est la vie, it's life. But unfortunately, when we are in this difficult moment, we all need to come together to obtain the best for our communities. This is why I'm encouraging whatever is the dynamic, the political dynamic in the council, having a cross-party cooperation is in the best interest of all of us. Because by doing that, we are sure that we are safeguarding the interests of our community. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, William. And I think that point at the end, I mean, you made many important points, but that one at the end about cross-party cooperation at this time, I think has been really extraordinarily important and valuable on both the councils I represent. I was also really interested in your comments about changes in crime pattern, because up here in Hertfordshire, we've seen a great decrease in the drug work going on, with county lines being disrupted, quite heavily disrupted, but of course massive increase in domestic violence cases, which has been a great concern to the police, the councils and everybody else. So thank you for reminding us of some of those changes that we've seen. And now in my weekly meetings with police, they say bizarre things like crime is getting back to normal, which I find a very odd expression. But for police, that's how they talk, I guess. Okay, thanks very much indeed, William. And now for our fourth speaker, we go to Sarah Rouse, who's the leader of Malvern Hills Council. Tell us what it's been like for you.
Thank you. Well, Malvern is very different, I think, from the other councils' places. It's a very rural ward with small market towns, so I think it'll give you a different feel from the other examples. So to start off, in February this year, we had the worst flooding in decades in the district. The one town, Tenbury Wells, was almost wiped off the map, and of course still now, you know, it's in a terrible state. So just as I thought we were going to be able to get to grips with our flooding recovery, COVID arrived. My first concern and my first action was what am I going to do in my ward? So the first thing my co-councillor and I did was went directly to the pub, because that's where we felt we should go because they're about to close them. And funnily enough, when we were there, we met the rest of the local parish council. So clearly in the crisis, that was the place to be. What we then set about was how were we going to contact all of the houses in our ward, because I didn't want a single person not to have someone to ring. So what we did was we contacted the parish clerks and the parish chairman. We printed out over 1,500 postcards asking for volunteers to help, but also for those who needed help to contact us. And we created this system. Now, one of the smartest ideas, not the smartest ideas I've had, was putting through 500 doors my phone number and asking people to contact me. So I spent the next 2 weeks talking to people, which was absolutely delightful, but it's probably something I won't do again. But the nicest thing that people said to me was, I don't need any help, I don't need anything, but I know you're there. And that's what I needed. And that's what we wanted to do, was make sure nobody slipped through the net, that nobody was on their own. And within a week, we'd achieved that. We had a volunteer network set up. in the hundreds, and we had a WhatsApp group, a Facebook page, we had everything, and I felt that everyone in my ward was okay, that we could look after them. And then I had a really bright idea, which was to create a poster with all the local delivery options on there, from pet food to milk, paper, everything that you could need, hot meals that were being delivered, and I stuck it on every telegraph pole in the village, and everyone stopped ringing me. So if I had to do it again, I'd just do the poster, and it would have been a lot quicker and saved me a lot of time. The most memorable moment for me in that period and within my ward work was when a social worker had been given my number. She had no idea who I was, but she'd been given it from the volunteer network. And she was desperately trying to get someone home from hospital, and she needed someone to do the shopping. So instantly I said, that's absolutely fine. We can get the volunteers arranged. We can get them home. We can do that. And she rang back the next day, and she was almost in tears, because she said that was the only person that she'd been able to just get home without having any trouble, without worrying. She'd just sent him home. And I thought that really touched me. And I thought, we've actually done something really worthwhile here, something great. So that was my ward work going on. Whilst I've got all that up and running, I've also got to try and run the council. So we had all the meetings were just cancelled. And I thought, right, I need somehow to contact all 38 councillors. I've not normally been doing that. We were in administration, some groups were in opposition. And I decided that I was going to just email everyone. And that was it. That was going to be my way of doing this. What I did was I emailed them all out and told them what I'd done. And I asked them all to be the community leaders that we've been elected to be. And with the officers and Age UK, Community Action, all our charities, what we did within a very short space of time, we all created a volunteer network that worked across the district. So similar to the one that we'd set up in our ward, across everywhere. And I think I'm just incredibly proud of that we managed to do that in such a short space of time. What I then needed to do was, as leader, to lead, I suppose, was I needed to tell everyone what was going on, what the decision making was. So every day, every couple of days, from the national news down to the local level, I just sent out emails and updates. I asked questions. Anyone could contact me. And that was my way of engaging everyone. I set aside all the party politics and just said, we're here for each other and we've got to do this as a team. Even more complicated is we're a no overall control council. So there's every political party involved in all of this. And not only that, we share a senior management team with the council next door. So every part of it required us to keep information sharing and to keep talking to people. So I've just been emailing everyone. And I did at one point ask them if they'd had enough of me emailing them and they wanted me to stop, but they said, no, carry on. It's absolutely fine. And I'm still doing it now, and I've probably driven them nuts for 3 months. So my approach I took was just that we are all one team, like I said. And being an independent, I frankly had no idea or understanding of how the party political groups work. And I just decided to ignore everything. There's no rule book for here, how we run a council, how you lead a council in this time. So I just made it all up myself, and I just did it. And I just sent out all these emails. What I also did was I supported all councillors from all the political groups. So anyone who came to me with a problem, I encouraged them to help them and to make sure that I was there for everyone. And I also tried to bring, if there was an area where there was different political groups together, to try and make them work together as one unit. And it was a big focus and something that I was really passionate about. And I'm just so proud of it all worked, that for however long we just worked together as one team. The next level up, I suppose, from being the leader is how we work together across the districts and the county. So there's 6 districts and the county council all together. And what we did was we set up on a Friday a chat. So all of us got together and just talked through our problems, discussed what we needed help with, where we were, what we could do. And Worcester County Council had by this point set up a Here to Help phone number. So all our volunteer groups could fit in underneath that umbrella. But we were already up and running and had all of that covered. One of the nicest stories there is that the city, in the middle of all our rural area, was struggling with bin lorries. So we were able to share all our bin men and bin lorries and just really work across Worcestershire. And I think the whole idea of the One Worcestershire is something that's strengthened through this, and we'll keep going because we're so much better together than we are as an individual district. And we do argue quite a lot, and it can get a little bit feisty. But overall, I think this has all brought us closer together, and we've got a much better personal relationship with each other than we did before, because we've spoken to each other every Friday and had a row about whether or not we're putting the parking bays in whichever street and highways. And so that is a good point that's come out of this for us. And it's quite entertaining as well. I think one of the key things for me is, out of all of this, is the amazing ideas and the innovation that we've had to do and that we've created, and how we've worked so flexibly. And I like to focus on the positives, not the negative things that have happened, just draw on that and go forward with that. The renewed community spirit across the district has just been amazing, and the volunteering and all the help. What we've set up is a crowdfunding platform to fund all the local charities and help them adjust and innovate. So all the local councillors can champion their cause, whether it's a Good Neighbour scheme, or helping community transport get back together, helping Age UK change the way they do things, any little scheme like that. They can all get into our crowdfunding, and we've managed to pull in money from across public health, across Worcester County Council, across the other districts, to pull it all together. And I think that's something amazing that's come out of this, and something we're going to keep doing. Pushing the Good Neighbour network is also one of our solutions to how we keep our volunteers engaged. So a lot of rural areas now are setting up their own little systems, and it's like rolling on the COVID volunteer network we've got into something bigger. And that's something I really want to keep pushing with. Our focus now obviously is recovery, and how we get back where we, to where we were or somewhere near it, and focus on the residents. I think as a councillor, I have to say I'm exhausted. I'm sure we all are. 3 months ago, I had a job, don't have a job anymore. Very tragically, we lost one of our family members to COVID. So I think, it's taken it really close to home. But I think, well, I'm still here, and we're all still keeping going. And I've been inspired by all these amazing things that people have done, all these little stories, all the cooking the food and helping your neighbour and everything like that. And that's what I want to keep hold of, and I don't want to let that go. Whatever I can do to keep that and keep it going and focus on that through our recovery, that's my real passion now. And I think one of the points that, I was thinking about is how democracy's changed in the last 3 months, and it has broken down in some areas, but if we can, as William had said, set aside some of that party politics and just focus on the residents and what's important, and keeping the innovation going, that's what I want to see happen now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. What a fabulous bunch of speakers. And thank you so much, all of you, for your contributions. Now, the questions are pouring in, but I wanted to give you a heads up that some of them are about how we've been responding at a time of pandemic, but some of them aren't. So there's some quite general ones as well. But let's stay with the pandemic to start us off. The first question is from the redoubtable Councillor Amy Cross in Blackpool. And her question is, during COVID, we've all adapted to new ways of working. Apart from the obvious virtual advances, what new ways of working will you adopt in a post-COVID world? Who'd like, I'll give you a choice. Who'd like to start with that? Okay, don't all volunteer at once. I'll give an example, and that will give you some thinking time. Last night, I had a Zoom meeting with an angry street full of residents. They were angry, as residents often are, quite legitimately, about speed problems in their street. I've had it converted to a 20-mile-an-hour zone. Are people obeying that rule? No. And there are lots of fears in that street. Now, I know that if I'd gone to a public hall to have that meeting, it would have got very angry and very fractious. I wasn't alone. I had 2 ward district council colleagues with me. But somehow, despite all the worry and the fear and the frustrations, having a screen full of people talking to us from their own homes did diffuse some of that anger. So I'm going to be doing a whole lot more of potentially angry meetings on Zoom rather than places where tomatoes can actually be thrown. Okay, Sarah, you want to come in?
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. I'm going to take that one as well. I think I was just thinking that I'm going to focus on the bigger issues and the things that are really important, because I very often found that you get bogged down in really minor stuff, and it becomes so important to you, but actually it's not. And we need to set aside that. And I'm going to stop worrying about whether or not they want the meeting at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock or whatever. We're just having the meeting, because it's what we do in the meeting that's the important bit. So it's focusing on the real problems. And that's what I'm going to try and do, not get bogged down in the minutiae of squabbling.
Okay, that was Zoom bingo for I had myself muted. Caroline, you're next.
Yeah, I think technology has really been kind of the biggest key. I mean, obviously we've got to the point where we've all learned how to do meetings on Zoom, meetings on Team. There are some probably less technologically advanced members of our council who have managed to, maybe after 5 or 6 meetings, eventually get to the point where they've actually learned how to unmute, which I think has been actually fantastic, bearing in mind where we started. We've been communicating a lot more via things like WhatsApp, but I think some of our councils and the way that we work in so much of using paper forms to try and have to get things in by specific times. When this pandemic began, we were unable to have any key decision making done via meetings, which, you know, proved to be really challenging. And now we've got to the point where, you know, holding full council meetings is easy. Everyone seems to know what they're doing. And I think some people are quite excited about getting back into the chamber. But if that doesn't happen too quickly because people are shielding, we're able to manage. So it just goes to show that the worst case scenario really can happen. And we all manage to adapt. You know, everyone moves on, everyone learns to live with it, and actually we can improve the situation, if anything else. Move into the 21st century.
Interestingly, it was interesting to me, the annual general meeting of North Herts Council, which was conducted on Zoom, was the first full council meeting I can ever remember which had absolutely 100% attendance of councillors. Oliver, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I think people have touched on this already, but I think this whole aspect of a digitisation agenda in our councils has been sped up, and the intensity of it has increased through COVID, partly because we've had to, but I think now we've got a lot more avenues open to us because we've had to adapt in that way. And I'd like to see some more of those changes brought about, especially in sort of children's and adult services, around how we can change the way we interact with some of our residents in that sense. I think there's definitely something to be said around the quality of communication that has gone out during COVID. So I think we've been particularly good at communicating with residents on social media and in different formats. We've really had to think outside the box, and that's a culture that I think we should keep. And then I think there's also something to be said around the use of volunteers and some of the more community work that we've done during COVID. So there's some councillors in our borough that have been doing kind of mini call centres in their own houses to just make sure people are okay and check up on them, make sure they've got the right resources that they need and support they need. And I think we're having discussions now about how we can potentially raise some of that up to become a bit more of a core service for some parts of the borough. So I think it's also inspired some conversations around how we can better help some of our most vulnerable residents through some of those conversations that have come around during COVID. So there's a lot to learn, but I think digitisation in terms of the corporate services and then in terms of community services, we've taken lessons away, which I think we can definitely keep.
William, did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I agree. In terms of digitalization, it does make a big transformation. It brought us closer because in our world, we do have surgeries. Normally, we do them in a public place, but we have to adapt. And we, with one of my colleagues, we took the initiative to have the surgeries on Zoom. So it brought a lot of people that we didn't know before. For them, it was very convenient, and they didn't need to travel from one place to another. They just go on their computer or iPad and tell us their queries or the issues. The information is going faster, and we are closer thanks to the social media. The only limitation I have expressed earlier is about the elderly people. Some of them, they are not included in the digital world, and we need to invest more. We need to support them, train them, because nowadays it's key for them to control those tools in order to communicate their issues.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Let's move on to question 2, which isn't about a pandemic at all, really. And it's come from a number of people, so I won't specifically name any. We've had a number of questions about diversity, including one with a suggestion to explore more cross-party platforms to encourage inclusion. The question is, how can we encourage a more diverse group of people to stand for election? Caroline.
Thank you, Judy. In Hertsmere, actually, we hold very successful Be a Councillor days where we invite lots of different people across all spectrums in for the day. That works really well, actually, and we are a diverse borough with quite a diverse membership on our council as well. We also hold youth democracy days where we invite school children in to learn all about politics. We bring them into the chamber, they meet other local councillors, they meet our officers, they kind of have a training session, get to understand the budget, the functions that the council does. And really what it does is, from a very young age, it inspires them to understand their own borough, where they're growing up, what's going on in there, and to really understand the concept of local government versus national politics. So that kind of brings them through, so that when they kind of get to the end of their school career, we are hoping that it would encourage them to come and try it out to be a councillor, because that's really what we want to do. We want to, you know, harness young people, diverse people, as many people as possible, so they can represent our wonderful great borough, and it works really, really well.
Okay, thanks very much, Caroline. And the whole Be a Councillor notion is one that quite a lot of councils do off their own bat, but it's also one that the LGA can help people with, because they have a lot of experience of putting on such events, both for the population generally of a council, but also for particular groups like women, people from an ethnic minority, however you want to increase participation. William.
Yeah, diversity is a very wide word because it includes all the social groups. Could be the young people, the elderly people, all kind of social structure of our society. So I think diversity is something very important in a group, is a proof of the wealth of the group. In a diversity, you have a mixture of culture. And as a party, is suicidal not to take into account diversity. But before trying to attract diverse people, we need to understand their political culture in order to attract them, because for each person from different background has got a specific political culture. I'm giving you an example. Someone from involved in politics, it would be very difficult for them in UK to be comfortable to be involved in politics. So this is a political culture we need to understand as a party before trying to attract a diverse group into politics. So there's a lot of work of understanding the mindset, the political mindset of each individual before trying to attract them. Many people are sharing our values, but they don't know. We need to engage with them, and also once we bring them into the party, we have to push them, educate them about our value, and work with them. Because in the past we have attracted diversity in the party, but we just use them to deliver leaflets, but we didn't help them to develop. It's very important to develop diverse people in the party. This will show a strength of the party, able to have the different interaction with different ideas, different cultural belongings.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Anybody else want to come in on that one? Oliver.
I can run that one. I think, as we all know, our politics is nowhere near as diverse as it should be. I think it's too male, it's too white, it's too straight, and I think the onus is on all of us to bring people in that we want to stand as councillors. I'd imagine there's a lot of councillors who were contacted by somebody from their local party, whatever party that be. Somebody's perhaps suggested they stand for the pool, however you do it, in your borough, and then they've been taken through the process. It's very rare that you get organic people wanting to kind of come up and then want to stand for council. People have to be educated and brought in and explained to about how they can get involved. And I think the onus should be on all of us to do that. And I think there's probably a bit more of a structural problem, which is that we need to foster a progressive attitude towards diversity in our politics and our groups across the political spectrum that we don't currently have. And I think it can't just be, as I think that the last speaker was sort of alluding to, we can't have a sort of politics that, you know, it's okay to be a young councillor but you're sort of a bit gimmicky. It's okay to be BME councillor but you can just do BME issues. That's not the case. You know, you should be a respected representative in whatever avenue that you feel. So I feel like it's a more structural issue, but I think the onus is on all of us to make the change that we believe in, and I think it's the right thing to do. It's not even a debate anymore. So hopefully we can, you know, as we change over the next 10 or 20 years, if we're all still councillors, we'll see that come through. But the responsibility is on all of our shoulders.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Oliver. Sarah?
Yeah, just from my perspective, I think we need to do something about council meetings. We need to make things a bit more interesting. I don't know the last time you sat through an audit and standards meeting and thought that's a really good use of my 2 hours. We need to make it more relevant to us and that you're actually achieving something, because I've sat through an awful lot of meetings that thought, well, don't know why I bothered with that. And I think we have to accept that, and we have to change how we do politics, change how we have our meetings. Do we need all the formality and structure? Can we be a bit more relaxed about it and take away that formality? And that's certainly what I'm trying to do in Malvern. It's more engaging, it's more relaxed. I'm not sure we need all the structure we've got, but that might just be me.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I've got a question 3 now. For any of you, us, we, who've ever been in opposition, which is some of us but not all of us, I suspect, which is how can councillors ensure, oh sorry, I should have said it's from Lee Redman, who I know is part of a group of 3 or 4 in the West Country. How can councillors ensure that they get things done in their council, influence and help their constituents when they're in opposition?
It's directed to me.
I think it's
I
a lot
can't
for
answer
me.
this one, I'm afraid. I can't answer. I'm sorry.
I can help.
Possibly William, Sarah and me. Yeah, go on, William.
I mean, taking my example in our borough, as a position, we try to engage, we do our best to engage with the local community. It's important for us not to spend too much time in the town hall. We, of course, express our ideas, our recommendation, but sometimes we could be ignored by the party in power. But what we do is we know that we are elected to represent our communities, so we undertake a lot of actions. The first thing we do is the surgeries. It's very important for us to have surgery session and listen to our residents with their issues. We also have a team dedicated to ask, where we question the administration on key issues, could be in housing, community safety. We also encourage to have cross-party scrutiny commission. That's the platform we use the most. And also when we do something positive, we make sure that the public is aware. So we collaborate also with the press to show to the resident we are on their side. And we also spend a lot of time listening to the resident. So the key word here would be listening, caring, engaging. That the 3 words in terms of opposition that we do to show that we exist. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Sarah?
Well, I'm going to have to tell you all my secret here, as I always went to the officers and I sold them a really good idea, and then they took it somewhere else and then it came back again, and I never told anyone it was my idea in the first place. But I don't find that confrontational politics works. If you're yelling at each other across the council chamber, you're never going to get that together, are you? So it's about being an adult and trying to play the adult politics of this. And in Malvern, it's not always easy and it doesn't always work. But if the opposition come to me and we want to talk, I want to hear what they say. I'm reaching out all the time. We've got policy groups and trying to bring it all in. If you've not got a leader like that, it's difficult. But it's just that way of doing it. I've never achieved anything by shouting at someone or having a tantrum in the council chamber or putting it in the Gazette next week. It's about chipping away quietly and building respect with those people you're working with. And that's what I've always tried to do, and go to the officers.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. I've spent a very long time in opposition until recently in North Arts District Council, since more or less the dawn of time, actually. And I think it's about having lots of different techniques up your sleeve. So sometimes it is right to be theatrical, and sometimes if you really want to get something done, it's as Sarah says, it's quietly using your influencing skills. But I would say to Lee Redman and anybody else out there who's interested in developing this further, the LGA does run a rather excellent, if I say it myself, 2-day programme twice a year, specifically for opposition leaders to look at all the tricks of the trade, if you like. And I would encourage people to come on that, which is rather curious because the next question is from somebody who I think came on the very first pilot one of those. It's Councillor Sue Woodward from Burntwood in Staffordshire, who says, a lot of councillors have risen to the huge COVID challenges, but there are others who've all but disappeared. Both will have been experiencing pressures. How should we support colleagues from both groups as we move out of lockdown? Have you got any councillors like that in your councils who've kind of disappeared a bit?
I think if I just come in, Chair,
Yes.
I think as you'd expect me to say, every one of our councillors is fantastic, and everybody's done a great work during COVID. Although I've had people get in contact with me and say, what more can I do during this period? Because I see so much going on, and I think especially if you have a cabinet model, my diary is crazy, and then some people think, I see you doing all this stuff, how much more can I contribute? And I think that's a good thing that we want to harness. I mean, I've seen it called everything from Dunkirk spirit to post-Brexit community buy-in. I mean, there's been all sorts of names for it, but I think people have got a bit more community spirited, and I think councillors are representative of the community, in that there are some people that always want to get stuck in and always want to volunteer for stuff, and there are some people that like doing committee work and that like telling people their experiences in other ways. And I think we've got to try and find ways to help both of those groups of people after the end of this. But I think because being a councillor is quite hands-on and quite a demanding role, and I think that this has only exacerbated that. So we've got to try and help as many councillors as we can get as involved as they can during this period. And I think there are, as I said before, there are some councillors who I know from my own experience. We've got a particular councillor called Jacqueline Owen, who is massively hands-on and who is like the biggest community advocate you could ever go near, and then other councillors who perhaps don't really want to get involved to that extent. And I think we've got to try and help people to get involved to that extent and feel like they can have the confidence to do it.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Anybody else want to come in on that one? Yes, Caroline.
No, I agree with Oliver. I mean, in our local authority, all of our councillors have been absolutely fantastic, getting stuck in, and all across the board, not just us Conservatives, people across the chamber. We've all been working really well together. We've got a great cross-party motion coming to our full council meeting next week. And just the only thing that I would say in response to that question is, councillors, I suppose, are people, maybe in the beginning, when this was all first happening and some people were shielding, some people quite fearful and frightened. Perhaps it seemed like some people weren't stepping up to the plate, but I think now, you mentioned, Judy, or somebody mentioned that in your last meeting you had like 100% attendance in one of your meetings, and that's what we've had in our meetings. We found everybody's been really there, really present, really helpful, engaged, and wanted to work really well with their community. So we haven't seen that from our perspective, but it might have been a little bit to do with the COVID fear, I suppose, and hopefully people will come out the other side of that now that everybody's starting to learn to live with and understand the position we find ourselves in now.
Does anybody else want to come in? Thank you, Caroline. Yes, William.
Yeah, just a quick one. I mean, every councillor in our borough has been fantastic. They work according to their capacity. And some councillors are more visible than other councillors. And also some councillors are more active. But it won't be fair to say other councillors have been hiding, because in some sense, some councillors are, because of their age, they were shielding, and some councillors also were working from home. So it's not really fair to say that, because as elected representative, our first duty is we want to be councillor because we care for our community. And it will be very surprising in this period of time, a councillor to hide away.
I don't think Sue meant people hiding away because of things like shielding. I'm sure she didn't.
No,
because strangely, as I mentioned earlier, I've been a shielding councillor, and yet I have never been so busy as a councillor ever in my very long life as a councillor. And you know, it's a weird thing because you wouldn't have actually once thought that possible. But it's beginning to sound as though we just need to send a posse up to Staffordshire and sort them out. Shall we do that? Clearly the thing to do. Okay, the next question I've got is from Caritas Charles. As councillors, what can we learn from this pandemic about being open and respectful about our mental health? My goodness me, that's a big subject. Who'd like to start us off? Caroline.
Thank you very much for your question. I'm really passionate about mental health. In fact, this falls within my portfolio because I look after leisure, culture and health. And there was so much incredible work that we were actually doing in the run up to this pandemic to try and ensure that people were doing lots of physical exercise. And actually, the two major work streams we were doing to deal with physical exercise and also to deal with issues of social isolation, where we had all of these wonderful schemes which were just all coming into formation before this pandemic, and they seem to have been the two things that you know, were really actually affected by COVID, because social isolation has been an enormous issue, obviously for our elderly, plus the ability for people to actually go out and do their mental health. So yes, I would absolutely encourage post-COVID for us to make sure that whatever we can do to make sure that people are getting back to exercise, back to sport, spending more time together, actually building bonds. And actually, I know I touched on it before, but volunteering is extremely good for people's mental health. So trying to foster getting people back into volunteering. And I think with some of the younger members of our community, because some of our older volunteers will not be volunteering for much longer, on issues, single issues that they feel really passionate about, I also think will be a really good way to make sure that we kind of keep our communities going and moving forward in a really positive way. So you know, I'm really passionate about mental health, and I'm hoping that after this we can get back to lots of the exciting projects that we were doing before or currently, and just try to work them in a slightly different way than we were. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Anybody else on that one? Yes, Sarah.
Yeah, I think sharing our stories and talking about it. The one thing we don't do is talk about it enough and say it's all right, it's okay if you've got a mental health problem. We should be sharing all of that, and it's taking it down from having any sort of stigma. We've just taken on a youth champion who we had to interview via Zoom in the middle of all of this, and he's very passionate about mental health, and that's going to be what he's championing this year. And I think that's important. We just got to keep talking about it, keep explaining, and keep rolling that out there, and that's what we're doing in Malvern. It's just keep being open.
Thank you very much. Oliver, you wanted to come in on this one.
I agree, similar to what Sarah's just said. I think is that we've got to be open and transparent about how we feel about some of these things. And you know, as I've tried to say in my sort of opening statement, I think councillors have had a really difficult time during this period anyway. We are, if you know, by nature, political animals to an extent, in whichever political group you're in, be it, you know, independent or one of the main political parties. I think you'll always be wanting to do more, and you kind of work on a self engine. So when you're trapped at home and you're trying to deal with all this stuff, and you know, essentially on your own for a great period of time in front of a screen, it's massively mentally taxing. And I think, you know, I've struggled during this whole period, and other people have struggled the same. And I suppose you go into it thinking, you know, I'll be okay, it's only working from home, and then you suddenly realize that there are all these different pressures and difficult things that you've got to deal with, and it's been a bit of a roller coaster. And I think a lot of people will probably relate to that. I mean, I've struggled with it, and other people will have done as well, and we've got to make sure that support is there for councillors, and that, as Sarah said, there's this culture of being able to share how you feel. So I've got friends that have been really great with me that are nothing to do with the council, and they've really helped, either to just, you know, have a drink in the garden or whatever. It's been great. But some people don't have that, and I think we've got to support councillors and make sure they can continue to do a job in that environment.
I think also there's a big question of using our own experiences, and I certainly have done, of the shock of being told that I wasn't going to leave my house for at least 3 months, and the effect that had on my mental health. And then suddenly 3 months later, being told I'm allowed to go out once a day and discovering I don't want to go out because I'm now too frightened because 3 months ago you told me that if I went out I'd die. So why suddenly do you think I want to go out? If anybody told me 4 months ago that I could even possibly bear to be in my house for 3 months, I'd have said that they were mad. And I do think that sharing some of those stories that we've all got, you know, Caroline's presumably been homeschooling a fair bit of the time. We've all got different experiences which will have been affecting our mental health. And I certainly know from my own daughter, who's been homeschooling 2 little ones, probably of about the same ages as Caroline's, that that's driven her absolutely bonkers in terms of what she regards as her expertise. She's a novelist, she's not a homeschooler. You know, so all those things where we don't just become councillors to do political stuff, we become councillors to do people stuff. And I think that's probably true of all of us. Any other comments on that one? Yes, William.
Yeah, we are councillors. We are not invincible. We are human beings. We are also political animal, I know, but it's very important in this difficult period of time to be open about our mental health, particularly through this period we went through. It was a big trauma, and also we not only we have our personal trauma, but also every day we are listening to different issues from different families, and we are taking a lot on us. So it's important for a councillor to be open, could have a discussion, open discussion with the colleagues. And also, like Oliver mentioned earlier, I agree, there should be a sort of support for councillors to cope with those difficult times. Is very important as human beings we are.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I have a question from Councillor Sue Osborne, which is, what lessons from your COVID experiences would you like to see reflected in the government's forthcoming devolution papers? Oh, heavy, heavy. We will all have different feelings about this. I suspect that the most complicated feelings about this might come from Malvern Hills and Hertfordshire as 2-tier authorities. So Sarah, you seem to be unmuted. I assume that means...
Oh, well, I'll talk about anything. Yeah, it's a really tricky one, because as far as I'm concerned, what we've done with One Worcestershire, how we've worked over COVID, how we've come together and what we deliver locally because of the way we work, works. We've got local people dealing with local issues. If we were a bigger authority, if we go to a unitary, we lose, I would feel, that real local connection. And I can't honestly see what benefit there would be to residents, because, okay, we'd have less councillors, we might save a bit of money, but what we've got at the moment I think works well. So I'd say keep it local. Keep the people on the ground who know their residents, who can go out and put the leaflet through 500 doors and then go and do your shopping. That's what I want to keep.
Okay, thank you very much. Caroline, do you want to offer Mr. Jenrick any advice on this?
I think we're in quite an enviable position where we are, because we have the same political party on the parish council, the district council and the county council in majority, which basically allows us the opportunity to be able to work together very effectively. Yes, on the district side, we're obviously much closer to the ground and closer to the electorate and able to, I suppose, see results much more rapidly and much more quickly. On the county council, obviously, you know, Judy, we're on the same authority. It's a bit of a different animal. Things take more time. But if there can be efficiencies to be made, I was a councillor originally on Barnet Council, where we were a unitary authority. I found it very easy to be able to work and be in control of everything. I think that's what appealed to me about becoming a twin hatter and being able to work on the borough and county, not having to go to somebody else and ask for an answer. So from another councillor's perspective, who isn't me, it's probably more frustrating because people are coming to you who don't necessarily understand the system and asking you for answers, and having to turn around and say, well, actually, that's not our function, it's somebody else's function. I think it's very confusing. It's very confusing for the electorate. I've been married to my husband for 13 years. He only just about understands the difference between what the district and the borough does. So anything that can simplify things and potentially cut costs, personally, I can understand the attraction, but it's not specifically an issue for me because of where I find myself politically.
And the other great advantage, of course, that Caroline and I both have as twin hatters is that we can run a sort of unitary authority from our houses and never be passing people around. I don't know whether anybody else even knows what we're talking about. Oliver and William, in your happy unitary states? Have you got
vague idea, but I think it's an important principle. I think if we talk very loosely, that politics is best done locally, and I think during COVID that's probably shown us that more, is that the best part, and I did mean that, the best part I think of government that's handled COVID in the best way has been local government. So I'd like to see whatever structure comes out of that, I'd like to see it kept local, and I think we've got to support communities to do the work they want to do, instead of what seems to be happening at the minute, which is the vibe I get. It seems to be a lot of banding up of smaller areas into much larger areas. I'm not necessarily sure that that's the best for keeping politics local to people and people connected to their politicians.
Did you want to say, William?
Thank you, Judy. In our cases, I think we, in terms of business continuity, in terms of crisis, I think the councillors didn't have any enough training to be ready for this COVID-19. And as a borough council, we would have been, for the future, for any other wave or crisis, to have a business continuity training for each councillor so that we all know what's happening exactly. So I think we would like to be all actively involved, but there were some kind of limitation because among us, some of us didn't have the ability to how can I say, to interfere, and not to interfere, but to put forward our ideas in terms of business continuity. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I think that's going to have to be the end of the questions. I was tempted to take the last one I've got, which was for us each to give one piece of advice to anybody thinking of standing for election, but I think that could take about 10 years. By the time councillors start giving advice to people, it's a pretty dire thing, really. So I think we'll leave that for now and just get you to reflect on it. As it happens, the LGA, which I believe has been incredibly quick off the mark during the pandemic as well, in terms of making new resources available to people, to councillors dealing with their very changed roles. It just happens that today, this very day, a new guidance has been published on our role, councillors' role in reset and recovery. And everybody who is on this call, this webinar, this session, is going to be sent a link to that, so you can get hold of it really quickly and really easily. And that will be happening just after the meeting. I'm sorry that that's all we've got time for. At the beginning, I thought an hour and a half was an awfully long time, because when you're chairing something, so many things can go wrong that it seems like an endless process. And the other thing, of course, that has happened a lot in this pandemic is that a lot of daft people like me have ended up going out and buying puppies. And I've got a brand new puppy who's been yelping in the next room, and who I really do need to go and see to very soon. So really, what I need to do now is simply to thank all our speakers for their fabulous contributions. Thank you, Caroline, Oliver, William, and Sarah. Thank you to all the people who have come to this session. There have been a lot of participants, and thank you everybody who asked questions, and I'm sorry that they didn't all get answers. I don't know whether there's any way of capturing those questions and making you all answer them as your homework over the next week or so, but I will ask, no, I'm getting shaking heads, I'll ask you over the next week or so. So I think really that's all there is. I don't think I've got many other housekeeping announcements because I still don't need to tell you where the toilets are, but there will be a number of other webinars, and today's will be published on the LGA website very soon, so that if you found it so gripping that you want to see it again, then you can do that. Whether it'll ever end up on Netflix, I don't know, but you can certainly see it again. And there will be a very short survey that you'll be sent by the LGA. Please do try and complete it, as we do value feedback. And, you know, when we run programmes for councillors across the country, in the old-fashioned way, where councillors would congregate in Warwick University very often on LGA programmes, very often we wouldn't let you out of a room without filling in an evaluation sheet. But now, of course, we just have to depend on you to do it. So it would be really, really helpful if you will fill in those evaluations about how you found today. And all I have simply to say now is to thank you very much for coming. Thank you, speakers. Thank you, participants. And stay safe. Thank you very much.